Hey everyone, the Mistress of Horror here, also known as author D.L. Tillery. This week's episode, we're going to talk about my first five tips on writing short horror. All right, before we get started, make sure you press that subscribe button and give this video a like, so that way you can know when I'm uploading new videos. And I may as well tell you now, if you don't know, that I upload these horror-based videos on Saturdays each week. I also want to give you guys a little update before we jump into it. My video should be going up in value, so to speak. I'm going to get a little bit of lighting, and I have finally my new editing software coming, so I can actually do all the fun little spoofy things that we do when we edit videos. All right, so let's jump into this. Now, I write short horror and I also write lengthy horror. Really depends on what's happening at the time. But I know a lot of people always wonder about how to write short horror, I should say, more than anything. And you can use some of these things I'm going to say in just writing short stories in general, because a lot of people find it difficult to write short stories in general, except for those who already can do it. So you can take these 5 tips. I will have more tips down the line, but these are some of my top ones, so to speak. I don't always like to say my top 5 because that can change, but these are like the first 5 tips that I like to give you that I always follow. All right, so number one, don't overdo details. What I mean by this is don't introduce too many open-ended questions when you're writing a short story. This is fine to do when you are planning to write a longer novel or a series. Let's say you can always drop little tidbits of tips and things in the first book and then feed into them later. When you are writing a one-shot short story, you do not have the time nor luxury to do that, because you might actually end up writing a longer story than you intended. So don't go overboard. It's okay to give some details, obviously, because you're obviously writing a story still, but be careful about writing too many and then forgetting them and then leaving them open-ended. And horror, this could be fine. However, we'll touch on that a little bit later about the difference of overdoing it, leaving a little bit of clues and some unanswered questions at the end, just to, it'll be memorable, so to speak. All right, so tip number 2, make sure you can see my hand. Tip number 2. Tip number 2, make sure you still have a beginning, middle, and an end. This is still a story that you're writing. It does not matter that it's short or not. I don't know the length that you will be trying to do, but again, you don't always know the length that you're going to end up with, just like when you're writing a full-length novel. You do know, though, that you have to stop at some point when you're writing a short story. You don't have the luxury that you have when you're writing a full-fledged novel. One other thing I want to say, what you want to do is, when you're writing at the beginning, middle, and the end, you want to, I want to say here, you don't want to get lost. Don't want the reader to be lost or left wondering to the point where they feel that the story was incomplete. There's, in horror, especially in horror, it's fine to leave some unanswered questions, like I was mentioning earlier. However, you still want to have an end. Rather the end is somewhat of a cliffhanger that you're never going to touch on again, because obviously this is a short story. You won't be coming back to it. But you have to be very careful of how you do this. Like, you don't want to bring up something that someone's going to remember to the point that they're wondering at the end, like, you didn't touch on that. I feel shot. I feel hollow, empty, that you didn't touch on that. If it's something like the monster's background or something like that, whatever the monster may be in this case, that's fine. You don't have to get into that so much, but story plot holes, you still have to think about story plot holes, even if it is a short story. That doesn't change. So anyway, I have my notes, so I'm gonna make sure I get any of my points here. And let's say, so tip number 3, shroud that baddie in mystery. So that's in my opinion, that's one of the best things or aspects of short horror. You can start your short story, horror story specifically at this point, and they may never find out why the baddie is the way the baddie is. Rather, let's say you have a monster that lives on a mountaintop or something, and then the people go hiking, let's say, and then they are hiking, and then the monster attacks them, and they get killed or not, or whatever, they get chased or whatever. You may never touch on where the monster came from, why the monster's on the mountaintop, and I have a screamer in the background. You may never find that out, and then you're fine with that when you're reading short horror stories. Even when you're reading short stories, you don't expect to find out all the details, but it's specifically when you're talking about the baddie of the story, rather that be like whatever the monster is, or not monster, or if you're writing more of a thriller and it has like a person in it or something like that. But either way, you don't have to give away the reason why or where they came from. When you're writing a full-fledged novel, you may get into that. You don't have to either when you talk about horror, but to like more details when you talk about full-fledged novels. It's a nice touch sometimes to leave the darkness with no light, so to speak. So you don't have to. So I think, in my opinion, a lot of the really good short horrors, they don't even touch on those type of things in the story. They don't really touch on those. So think about that if you're writing short horror. You don't have to go into detail about the lore of the monster, about its backstory, about why it's on that mountain. You literally can it's there. So it doesn't need explanation. All right. Tip number four. Don't be afraid to kill everyone. This is not something you need to do. You don't have to kill everyone. But don't shy away from death. When you talk about horror specifically, you could be doing another type of short story as well, but don't shy away from the killings, because that's always one of the most yummiest parts of horror. Who's going to get killed and who's going to live? Maybe no one lives. You don't know, but don't shy away from it. Like, if you're squeamish of killing in your stories, a little harder to write horror. There are horror where the people in the book, or whoever, may not be people, maybe just be beings or whatever, in the horror story that's going up against the baddie, they may not get killed. That's fine too, but just don't shy away from murdering. It's not a big deal. Like, just a lot of people in horror expect it. Like, you expect death, carnage, and all kinds of stuff. Just saying. That's one of my tips. Like, when I write my short horror stories, there's going to be death. There's going to be death all over the place. So all right, so my final tip for today is know what kind of horror you are writing, rather that be gore or psychological horror. Whatever kind of horror you're writing, know before going in, because you don't want to be all over the place. So that's definitely something that you want to know going in, because it's very, very, very important. You don't want to be all over the place. You want to have you can mix genres. So don't get me wrong there. As long as you know that's what you're doing, because there are different types of horror out there. And actually, I'm going to make a video on the different types of horror that there are, and touch on that, because there are different tastes. Some people don't like psychological horror. Some people like gore. Some people don't like gore. Some people like psychological. There's lots of different kinds out there. So I will actually be making a video on the list of different types of horror with descriptions on those, just in case you haven't heard of some. One of my favorite kind is Cthulhian horror, the most basic name for it that you would know. So I like that kind. It's very shrouded in mystery. The different creatures and beings that's in it, you don't know where they came from. It's very unexplained type of creatures and stuff in it, and it's somewhat relatable to psychological, because it's just mind blowing, so to speak. So that being said, always know what kind of horror you're writing going in. This also can be drawn over to just when you're writing stories in general. Know what you're writing, as far as like genre, so you know where you're at, know what you're doing, what you're offering to people. Because and also horror, being that there's a lot of different ones out there, but like my top one is definitely Cthulhian horror for sure. like I said, there is a lot out there. So, but I'll be doing a video on that, so you guys keep a lookout for that. Next week's video is actually going to be on my first touch on a video game that I like that is based, it's a horror video game. Those also exist. So yeah, look forward to that. So I hope you enjoyed the tips that I have in this video. Let me know in the comments if you write horror, if you write short horrors, if you're interested in writing short horror, if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm open to that as well. I do streams every Tuesday with Aphrodite Lee, author Aphrodite Lee. So you can also drop in on those. It's on her channel sometime, or on my channel. You can look her up as well. And if you have a question to pose to me while I'm live, then I will, of course, answer it. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye. Stay scared.